the Agile brand. Hello, my friends. This is Bonnie Habian, and welcome to This Is How She Did It. There are some unbelievable women who've faced big challenges, pushed through fear, and stepped into their worth with grit and authenticity. How? Well, we share it all on This Is How She Did It. You'll hear real stories of persistence, reinvention, and those aha moments that change everything. No fluff, just honest insights and hard-earned lessons from women who refuse to be held back. If you're craving true connection, courage, and practical tips for reshaping your own life or career, you're in the right place, because your story isn't over, not even close. What happens when the world decides who you are before you even have a chance to speak? When your name becomes a headline, your identity a label in a story you did not write, have no interest in being in, but now find that you suddenly can't escape. Well, that's Amanda Knox. If you put her name in a search engine, you get more than 150 million different results, theories, opinions, crazy ideas, whatever. And she has a story. That's because she has a very painful story, but one that I think we can all learn from. Now, when I thought about having her on, and I said, you know what, I'll give a recap of her story for those of you who don't know it. I can't imagine that there are not many of you who don't know it. But when I thought about it, I said, you know what, this is her story. No one tells it better than she does. And I would love to start by first saying, Amanda, honored to have you. I have followed you for a very, very long time. I think as well as becoming a mother, probably had a little bit of a different insight into what you went through after all of that. But could you give my audience a little bit about your story and bring us up to where you are today?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. So I guess most people are familiar with who I am because when I studied abroad when I was 20 years old, one of my roommates was brutally raped and murdered in our house. And I was subsequently accused of being involved with that crime. And it was tremendously scandalous, international headline making case that was very unethically covered in the media. I was twisted into this horrific, cartoonish, femme fatale caricature, and evidence of my innocence was overlooked. Evidence of guilt was invented, and I spent 4 years in prison before I was eventually acquitted. So I was convicted of the crime. I was eventually acquitted. I was tried again while I was free. I was convicted again, faced extradition until the Italian Supreme Court definitively exonerated me.
And that was in 2015, right?
Yeah, that was in 2015. So I spent about 8 years on trial, 4 of which I spent in prison. And then my story began in a way, because everything I've told you up to this point is just a thing that happened to me that I had extremely zero control over. And suddenly I was sort of faced with the prospect of re-entering the world, but, branded as a villain. And, even those who were convinced of my innocence, I was very much the girl accused of murder. And I was living with that burden as a young person, trying to navigate how to exist in the world, how to have faith in people and institutions again. And it was a long journey of recovering a sense of identity, a sense of place, a sense of purpose, and a sense of agency in my own life. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about this because I want to know, and I think a lot of people listening want to know first and foremost, how are you? So, like from on a scale of negative 100 to, I imagine that negative 100 must have been in prison, to today, on a scale of like 1 to 10, where are you in your life?
I'm doing fabulous. I would say I'm a 9 in the sense that,
Awesome. That no one's
I
110. No one's
yeah,
ever a 10.
no one's ever a 10, right? They're always like, that's the great thing of life, is it always gives you problems to solve. It's never boring. But yeah, so I'm a mother, I'm a writer, I'm a I'm a public speaker, I'm a podcaster, I'm a performer. I executive produced a new TV show on Hulu called The Twisted Tale of Amanda Knox.
Oh, we're going all into that one. Yeah, yeah.
Yep. I recently published a book called Free: My Search for Meaning, which really delves into my journey of trying to make sense of this really big experience and how to reintegrate into life, and my journey to reconcile with my prosecutor. So
Yeah.
I've been busy. I've been busy in a good way. I'm very, very busy. I have two small
No.
children, you know.
Well, that right in itself, keeps you crazy busy doing everything else on the side. But, listen, I know myself for one, I am just so happy that you're doing so terrific. And
Aw,
I think,
thanks.
I really want to take the listeners through, I think I mentioned to you prior to us kind of hopping on is that I found one of the things with your book was like almost that it was self-help for anyone. So I can't wait to dig down on that. But I want to go back to something that I listened to that I think if we go back to that sort of period when you first got out of prison in 2011, that started something very different for you. I mean, I know that when we look at life and we say, listen, I can't go back and reclaim myself. I'm not the same
Mm,
person. I'm different, right? So, in terms of whatever that reinvention looks like, you said at one point that you felt a part of you actually died in Perugia, which anyone can understand. And I think anyone that goes through any sort of trauma, it's about rebuilding and not so much going back, but moving forward. But one thing you said, and it hit me very, very hard, is that you said you came out with learned helplessness. What do you
mm.
mean by that? What was that like?
Well, the prison environment specifically is designed to render you helpless. You cannot open a door on your own. You can't, like, you do not have possession of your possessions. There is very little that you have actual control over. Your mind basically is the one thing. Like, you do not have control of your body, you do not have control over your relationships, you do not have control over anything. Your day to day is strictly regimented according to the laws of the prison. Your diet, just everything is out of your control. So that aspect of it is an extreme learned helplessness. But also I had an extra layer of learned helplessness from being wrongly convicted, right?
Yeah,
Like, the
absolutely.
truth didn't matter in my case, originally, when I was originally convicted. I was an innocent person who was, definitively called a murderer and a monster and was sentenced to 26 years in prison. And it didn't matter that that wasn't true. They sent me back to prison anyway. And I had this like existential crisis of realizing, like, well, if the truth doesn't matter, then how can I fight this fight? Like,
Right.
how do I have control in my life if the very thing that I thought that I could count on, the truth, wasn't there for me, like, wasn't enough.
Yeah.
And so I certainly re-entered the world even after my acquittal and I was released from prison with this sense of feeling like I was unmoored, that even though I had been vindicated and freed, I knew that there are things that we think are guaranteed in life, and they are not guaranteed. Like, there's no guarantee that your life will be fair. There is no guarantee that you will have a significant say in what happens to you, and that this illusion of control that we all live with is in fact an illusion. And so I had to grapple with that, and that feeling of just deeply existential helplessness, and find a way over time to rediscover what it is that I actually have control over.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think as a human being, when I heard you kind of say that, I thought how grateful and I can't imagine what we probably take for granted on a daily basis, but also it's almost like retraining your brain. We talked about your books. I know you did one in 2013, Waiting to Be Heard, and then the most recent one, which I really, really loved, Free: My Search for Meaning. You've done your podcast, you've done a lot of things. And during that journey, even the title of your book from 2013 to now shows me progress of kind of
Hmm.
where you're going in your journey. But I have to tell you, the Hulu series, this one in particular, I felt something different. Now, I
Hmm.
followed you for some time. I felt, at least from seeing this, that that was probably the closest of reality in some
Hmm.
respects that it really was. And I did hear you some point saying that you really wanted to make sure you got this right.
Oh,
I
yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
so did this help did this was this a little therapeutic for you? Because it was it's a great I can't wait for the next one to come out. I think 4 drops tomorrow or 5 drops
Wednesday.
tomorrow.
Yeah, it's
Like,
Wednesday. Yeah.
so I'm like every week on my exercise, I'm
You're like, "Ah."
riveted.
Yeah.
But I know the
Yeah.
next one goes out, so go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, everyone, so me and all of my partners in the making of The Twisted Tale of Amanda Knox on Hulu were very from the very beginning aware that the story of what happened to Meredith and what happened to me had been twisted and distorted and exploited for so long. And we were not in the business of replicating that kind of storytelling. And at the same time, we were all deeply invested in the big lessons that one can derive from a close and
Yes.
honest examination of this story.
Yes.
And so I think we all were very, very aware that there were very high stakes going into this story, and we had to get so much of it right because of how much it had been gotten wrong in the past. And so what that looked like is, I mean, a tremendous amount of research on the part of my partners, who, analyzed every facet, every court document, had everything translated, looked at dozens and dozens of interviews and written material from not just me, but also my prosecutor and the other important figures that are in the story. And one of the big things for me was, and again, my partners really embraced this idea, was that this is not a story that's a black and white. It's not about good guys and bad guys. What's really important is understanding how everyone can feel like the hero of their own story, and yet this like perfect storm of conflicting perspectives and language and culture can lead to
Oh.
like dire results.
That's a whole the whole language thing. I've been taking Spanish for like 12 years, and I if I was in that situation, they'd be like, I understand it pretty well, but get me to speak under duress, very difficult. And then I'm afraid you're gonna, misunderstand, not understand what I say. But so going back to this, I find I excellent job on that. One of the things I do know is that one of your executive producers, I believe, is someone else who went through something very, very, in a similar vein, similar thread. So how did or first of all, tell me a little bit about that friendship and how did that sort of I imagine that's got to be somewhat therapeutic for you as well, finding common threads among people who've been through something similar.
Yeah, so this project would not exist were it not for Monica Lewinsky. Monica Lewinsky is a friend and mentor of mine who I met back in 2017 initially.
Wow.
I met her right before I was ever going to give my first ever public talk. And it was at a time in my life where I was terrified to be in a room full of strangers. And I had been invited to speak about controversy and trial by media, but I had no idea if anyone would listen to me. All of my experience up to that point was people not listening to me and people, looking at me through the worst possible light and filtering everything I said through the worst possible interpretation, the least generous interpretation. And so I was very, very nervous. And she was somebody who similarly had been publicly vilified, publicly humiliated, at a very young
Very young
age,
age, yes.
at a very young age, sexualized and vilified for her sexuality. And so when I thought of anybody who could give me guidance
Yeah.
for how to like navigate this very obstructed path towards having standing up for myself and you know elevating my own voice above the chorus of voices who are already authoring my experience, I thought Monica Lewinsky. And then, so she gave me, great mentorship advice. And then years later, reached out to me after she had executive produced her own series about her own experience, impeachment, and said, "Hey, I know you've turned down opportunities like this in the past, but would you consider telling your story in a new way? And I think the things that she and I really saw eye to eye on was again, the public humiliation, especially of young women aspect, and revisiting those narratives about young women who are publicly vilified. And then on top of that, wanting to discuss like what is the bigger story, right? Like so much when we think of like a true crime story, which is what people sort of interpret my story to be, it's a courtroom drama, like that's what it's limited to. And in fact, the story is a much longer story of trauma and recovery than just what exists in the courtroom. And it also doesn't just happen to the one person who's at the center of it, but also to their families, to their
Oh, yes.
friends. They
Oh, yes.
belong to people. And that was something that was really important for both Monica and me, is that we really try to like showcase the bigger impact of this like very traumatic
It's
experience.
a
Yeah.
ripple effect for sure. And, it's funny. I recently interviewed Denise Huskins. I don't know if you ever saw her series American Nightmare on Netflix.
Mhm.
Something very, bless her heart, right? I mean, just she said something that I thought was very important. She and her husband, Aaron, chose courage over comfort. And I would say that's
Mm.
the same for both of you. You have to go through and say, either I can go away and hide, right? Or I can go out there and say, no, I'm going to find my voice. And as hard as that must be, you have to do that to become somewhat whole again, I truly believe.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely of the philosophy that you need to confront the thing that scares you instead of run away from it. But I have that perspective because I don't think that you can really run away from the things that scare
You
you.
can't.
Like
Yeah,
you can't ultimately. They just stay inside you. That hurt
you're right.
stays inside you. And so I'm always trying to like draw it out of me, like a poison. And that's how it feels less like a choice and more like a necessity.
In reading your book, it's very raw to me. I really could feel some of the things. Like I think you did a really good job at kind of explaining the very visceral sort of experiences you had, whether it is walking out and touching a door, whether it is looking at something in a certain light and seeing things differently with different glasses because of now where you had found yourself. But there are about five mantras I walked away that I think are part of your how, meaning how did you start to find yourself? How did you reclaim your agency? How did you all of a sudden, even though you may have been, locked away, you still had your mind, and I think you somehow dug deep somewhere to
Mm.
be able to realize some things. So, I want to go through a few of them. If you can give me just a little bit on what that meant to you and where you used it, like freedom is practice. Could you give me a little bit of where that came from?
Mm. Yeah, so, free my search for meaning, like, it's called that because I felt like this idea of freedom is something that has a huge resonance for me in my life. Clearly, my freedom was taken away from me in a very literal sense, but even after it was given back to me, I had limitations imposed on me that felt like obstacles to self-realization. And so I had to rediscover what freedom looked like for me in my life. And what I realized is that it's less about the external circumstances necessarily that you find yourself in,
Yes.
and it's more about the mindset that you have within those circumstances and how you choose to engage within the limitations. And so that's why it's a practice. It's a thing that you choose to do, because I think one of the big sort of like mind-blowing things for me was realizing that even if I'm not in a prison cell, I'm still bound
Yeah.
by the
Yeah. You
circumstances of
are.
my life. And if I have the mindset like in a prison cell of, if only I was not in this prison cell, well, I'm going to be living in a state of limbo because here I am, like actually in a prison cell, and I'm not living the life that I have, which is in a prison cell. And the same thing could be said of whatever circumstances that we can say about our life. We can say, "Oh, if only I wasn't sick," or, "Oh, if only I wasn't this thing or that thing." And that can become a debilitating limitation in our life instead of a just a a limitation that we acknowledge and then
Sure.
say, okay, how do I be effective? How do I move? How do I exist? How do I make meaningful choices within the bounds of what is possible?
Well, and I think that probably goes into what the next sort of thing I've learned from you is, if you're saying pain is inevitable, but suffering is a choice. And that kind of goes back to
Mm.
that, right? We all have pain, we all experience things. It depends, I guess, in some respects, either how we reframe it or what we do with it. So for you, how in the world were you able to realize that? Or what made you realize that? And how did you work through it?
Yeah. So, and to clarify for anyone who doesn't quite know what that means, pain is the things that, like, you stub your toe, you feel
Right.
pain. You lose your child to a
Oh,
disease, you have
yeah.
pain, right? This is
Right.
pain. This is inevitable pain, the parts of life that happen to us. Suffering is when we feel pain because we have pain. Suffering is when it's an extra layer of pain on top of inevitable pain where we resist the fact that pain is happening to us and that just causes us more pain. We don't want to have stubbed our toes. We don't want to have, lost our friend. Like there are
Right.
lots of and that is an extra layer of pain that is real because we are complicated animals and we are sophisticated and our brains are sophisticated and we can appreciate these nuances to our life. But ultimately, I find that they can be really, really debilitating
I agree.
because, yeah, I mean, you just feel like you can overindulge in suffering to the extent that you lose the ability. Yeah, like the pain has already, like maybe the immediate pain has already gone, but the suffering will last forever.
Right. Yeah, and I'm saying and I think you somehow have been able to kind of take that rationality, which is a good thing. No one deserves to suffer forever. Why keep that's only going to continue to handcuff you. It's only going to be, impact you in a negative perspective. When is suffering enough? And when am I free to go live the life I dreamed? And I think that is one that a lot of women can really relate to. I mean, I don't know if it's because in some respects we've been nurturers our entire lives, so we assume and take on everybody else's thoughts and feelings forever. But I think that's such an important one because you came out, had tremendous pain, and at
Mm.
some point you have realized, you know what? It's inevitable, but I can't live it forever. That's not helping anyone.
I think another thing, and this is particular to women, I think as well, is people tend to disbelieve our pain and to undermine it and diminish it
Minimalize it. Yeah, I
and
think you're right.
minimalize it.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that people who really indulge in suffering might be motivated by is the fear that if they get over it, it somehow means that the pain wasn't real.
Yeah, or that they somehow aren't sincere, or that you're exactly
Yes.
right, that there's something wrong, that they didn't suffer enough, you know?
Right. Right. And this idea that, like, unless and this goes back to like even mourning practices and how women had to wear like black the rest of their lives when their
When their
husband
husband
died in order to signal,
I
to
know.
signal that like that they had a real commitment to someone. And so it's like you have to be in pain and you have to be showcasing your pain for people to believe that it is real. And that's just not fair. It's just
No.
not fair. And
No.
so, especially when you like, it's funny. Like, on the one hand, we want to celebrate resilience and we want to celebrate being functional, and on the other hand, we punish people. Like
Right.
I've had
Right.
people say to me, "Well, what happened to you must not have been that bad because look how well you're doing now," and it's like,
Yeah, not fair. I mean,
that's not
listen,
fair.
I
Yeah.
no, it's not. I think we have one life to live, and I think we all listen again.
Hmm.
We go through bumps and bruises. What you went through was a train wreck. I will never. I mean, again, but I think we all have something to learn for that because at the end of the day, right? Everyone deserves to live a life that they dreamed of, right? And I think
Yeah.
in that respect, you know, you moving forward and being able to teach and help others to get through something truly horrific is a really good thing to do. Let me go to the next one. Forgiveness as freedom and forgiveness without apology. This is a very interesting one to me because I don't know. And do you hold any resentment at this point, or have you let that go?
Well, that's a good question. So to get to your point about forgiveness, and that's going to be a way for me to answer this question, is so part of the book that I talk about, and actually part of the show that you see, is this relationship that I developed with my prosecutor and this confrontation that we have ultimately because I asked him to meet face to face with me. And
I know we're going to that one deep.
yeah, we'll get into it, but yeah, but like when we talk about forgiveness, like that's immediately what comes to mind is it's like in my life when if I felt the urge or need to forgive. And, there are plenty of times where I have to forgive myself for being young and being, naive and all those things. But like the big one is my adversary, the guy who
Yeah.
threw me in prison. And when I initially reached out to him, it was not freedom that I had in mind. It was curiosity. It was,
Ah,
it was
curiosity.
Yes, like, I was haunted by the fact that I did not understand why what happened to me. Like, it wasn't random in the sense that it wasn't like just a flash of lightning struck me and there's, like, no explanation for it. Somebody chose to put me in prison and believed that they were right in doing so, but also, I was completely innocent, and there was no reason to think that I had anything to do with this crime. So why? Why did this man who had, a whole history and life and context behind him, why did he see a monster in me? And why did he pursue a case against me even when evidence revealed who actually murdered my roommate? Like, why? And so I was just haunted by not understanding. And so I eventually came around to the idea that I should just ask him.
Yes, and we're gonna get into that because that is even a deeper one. But before we get to that, I want to hit one
Yes.
more, and then we're going to
Okay.
save that one for a little longer conversation.
Okay.
If you're stuck, you are not. Choose freedom. Can you give me a little bit of what you thought? And did you have that thought when you were actually in prison, or was this something you developed after you came out? If you're stuck, you are not. Choose freedom.
So, if you are alive, there are always options. There are always options. And this was something that became very, very apparent to me when I was actually in the prison, because I saw people responding to imprisonment in radically different ways. Some people were so driven by dread and despair that they all they did was just lay in bed all day.
Wow.
And they often
Wow.
would, like, take medications that just put them into a zombie-like stupor, and they were just zombies. They were just, like, living dead in the prison. And then I saw other people, yes, we're trapped in a prison cell, but we're playing cards, we're writing letters to our family, we're learning a new language. Like, there were people who were able to view the same conditions in a very different way. And for
Wow.
me, and I even had that shift at a certain point because after I was convicted and I was sentenced to 26 years, I wasn't just like waiting to get my life back again. I was like there. And I had to figure out how, if there was any way to live a life that had any kind of value within those restrictions. And often that came from a shift in mindset, not from a shift in circumstances.
Let's talk about that because I think that's really important for people to understand. I don't know if I would be the zombie or I would be someone that eventually found purpose. I would hope at some point there would be some sort of inner drive that would take over. You find out that you are now sentenced to 26 years originally, right? You go in. What is that process between that moment and when you started to get some part of you back? And what mindset shift? How did that happen?
Hmm. I mean, I think the big difference between those of us who give up and those of us who find a way is a deep, deep knowledge that we are loved.
Wow.
I think that like a deep, deep knowledge that we have value. And like one of the things that a prison sentence does to you is what it's saying to you is that you do not have value. You are going to lose this many years of your life to an environment where you have no opportunity to pursue your potential. That's what it feels like.
That's what it feels like. Wow.
You are entombed for as long as we have decided. You are in a tomb. That's what it feels like. And the only way to push back against that narrative that is imposed on you is a deep, deep sense of personal value, which I believe comes from feeling loved.
And feeling connected and having your family, feeling loved amongst those people who know you, right? I would imagine.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I think that my mom, who's a big character in the book because she's a
Love her.
huge person
Yeah.
in my life, like she instilled in me from a very young age a deep, deep knowledge that my life had value, that I was loved. And so even when the world turned its back on me and entombed me, I knew that there was something worth fighting for. And so I tried to find a way to fight for it. And, that meant looking around, like having the courage to open my eyes and be curious about my surroundings enough to see the opportunities within the limitations. So, what that might look like for me, I went to Italy to study languages because I wanted to become a translator. And lo and behold, there was a huge population in the prison who didn't speak Italian because they were
Mhm.
foreigners. And as soon as I became fluent, I became the unofficial translator of the prison. So I was called in to help people like talk to their lawyers and talk to the doctor and read their court documents and write their letters to their family. And it wasn't what I envisioned when I initially went to
That's a
study
good
abroad.
feeling, though. Don't you agree? That's a really good feeling. I found
Yeah.
just from having that ability to cross culturally, it's a really cool feeling. So, but what you just said to me was extremely profound, and I appreciate and acknowledge you sharing that sort of deep sort of experience because I don't know if any of us very few people will ever know what you just expressed, and that just makes me feel grateful, but it also makes me feel deep empathy for you. And I am glad that you have such a loving feeling connection with others because that obviously has really fueled your success afterwards. So, I want to go into this last one, which is agency is clarity, clarity, and I've left this one for last because I
Mm.
think we want to spend some time on this, and we're going to break it down a little bit. What Amanda ended up doing is something unthinkable for most of us, but I think it also is a testament to actually that drive that she has inside of her or that need she needed to understand, which is probably bigger than any of us. And I think in some respects, after following her so much, I think it's something that really did help her. So hang on, we're going to hit on part two. And I want to thank Amanda for her time here today. We're going to pick up very quickly on part two in a little bit. But if any of you are out there listening, you've enjoyed this episode and it sparked something in you, please leave a review, leave a comment. That is the best way to help the show grow. And I want you to keep pushing through your own fear. Remember, you are so worth it. You have so much to give. Start believing in yourself. And we're going to teach you how. We're going to continue to teach you how. And this is how she did it. If you want to learn more about our guest, check out the show notes. And please take a moment to write a positive review about the show on Apple or Spotify, because this is the best way for bold women to find this show. To write a positive review, scroll down to the bottom of the podcast and click where it says write a review. In return, you get good karma and a shout out on a future episode. Until next time, my friends, keep pushing through that fear and making your future yours. You've got this.
The Agile brand.